It was the kind of place that beckoned you with whispers, hidden beneath the thick trees and the crushing weight of silence. The kind of place where old folk tales warned of shadows that moved by themselves and winds that carried voices. The Whispering Forest, they called it. A place where many had ventured but few had returned. Most dismissed it as superstition, but to those who had heard the stories, the fear was real. When Sarah, Mark, Jake, and Lily decided to spend their weekend hiking in the Whispering Forest, they thought of it as nothing more than an adventurous escape. A break from the mundane world to explore nature and share a few laughs. They had heard the rumors, the same ones that drifted through the small town like smoke, and had laughed them off. After all, legends were just stories, right? It was a bright Saturday morning when the group packed their bags with water, snacks, and enough enthusiasm to power them through the weekend. Mark, always the leader of their group, set the course. "We'll go in, explore, and then camp by the old stone bridge. We'll be back in a couple of days." "Piece of cake," he said with a grin as he slung his backpack over his shoulder. Lily, the quiet one, frowned as she gazed at the forest in the distance. "I don't know about this. The forest looks strange." Jake chuckled. "You're just scared of a couple of trees, Lily. Come on, it'll be fun. We'll prove it's just a bunch of old stories." Sarah, the most adventurous of the group, was already walking toward the entrance, her boots crunching against the dried leaves. "Stop being such a baby, Lily. This is going to be awesome. Let's go." Lily hesitated, then followed them, her anxiety growing with every step into the darkened woods. The trees stood tall like silent sentinels, their branches stretching out like gnarled hands reaching for the sky. There was a palpable weight in the air as though the forest itself were holding its breath. The birds had stopped singing and the breeze felt colder than it should have been. As they walked deeper into the forest, a sense of unease settled over them. The path seemed to shift beneath their feet, twisting in ways that didn't feel natural. The sunlight was muffled by the dense canopy, casting the forest floor in a perpetual twilight. A strange rustling came from the trees as if something was moving just out of sight. "Did anyone hear that?" Jake asked, his voice tight. "It's just the wind," Mark replied confidently, though his voice wavered slightly. But Sarah wasn't so sure. She glanced around, her eyes narrowing. "It's more than just the wind." Sarah stopped. Her gaze fell upon a large tree in the center of the path. At first she thought it was just an odd knot in the wood, but as she stepped closer she saw it. A symbol deeply carved into the bark. A twisted, circular design that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. "What the hell is that?" Mark muttered, stepping up beside her. "It's a symbol," Sarah said, tracing the carving with her fingers. It was worn, ancient, but still unmistakable. The lines seemed to vibrate under her touch. Something about it made her skin crawl. "I don't think we should be here." Jake rolled his eyes. "It's just some random symbol. Probably a kid's prank." Lily, who had been lingering at the back of the group, spoke up. "It doesn't feel right. Maybe we should turn back." But Mark was already moving ahead. "Come on, it's just a symbol. We'll find something cool further in." Against their better judgment they pressed on. The further they went, the more the atmosphere seemed to shift. The air grew colder, heavier, and every rustling leaf seemed to hide something watching them. They could feel eyes on them, hidden in the shadows. Suddenly Mark stopped. He turned around, his face pale. "Guys, where's Lily?" They looked around in confusion. Lily, who had been just behind them, was nowhere to be found. Panic started to creep into Sarah's chest. "Lily," she called, her voice shaking. "She was right behind us," Jake said, looking around in a frenzy. They began to call for her, running in circles, retracing their steps. But the forest had changed. The path they had been following had disappeared, replaced by tangled vines and roots that seemed to push back against them. The trees loomed closer, their trunks twisting in ways that felt unnatural. "Where the hell did she go?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. Mark cursed under his breath. "We need to find her. She couldn't have gone far." They split up, their voices calling out into the dense woods, but all they heard in return was the wind and the rustling of leaves. The deeper they went, the more oppressive the forest became. The trees closed in around them like a trap, the ground soft and treacherous beneath their feet. Every few moments they heard a faint whisper just out of reach, like someone was speaking their names. And then Sarah saw it. A flash of movement. A figure shrouded in darkness, darting between the trees. It was too fast to be human, too fluid. It was as if it blended with the shadows themselves. Her blood ran cold. "Did you see that?" Sarah gasped, her breath catching in her throat. Mark and Jake both froze, turning toward her. "What are you talking about?" Mark asked, his voice laced with panic. "It was there," Sarah insisted, pointing to the space between two trees. Someone was there. They stared into the shadows, but there was nothing. The forest felt alive, pulsating with a dark energy that made every movement seem sinister. Suddenly, Jake shouted, his voice raw with fear. "Look." He pointed ahead, where the trees parted slightly to reveal a clearing. In the center, lying motionless on the ground, was Lily. "Lily!" Sarah screamed, rushing to her friend's side. Lily was pale, her skin clammy and cold to the touch. Her eyes were wide open but lifeless, staring at nothing. She didn't respond when they shook her, and her lips were cracked as though she had been whispering something for hours. Mark knelt beside her, his hands trembling. "What happened to her?" "She's not breathing," Sarah cried, her voice breaking. Jake looked around, fear seizing him. "This isn't right. We need to leave. Now." But as they turned to go, they heard it. A low, guttural sound, almost like a growl, coming from the trees. The leaves trembled and the air grew even colder. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse with energy, and the trees seemed to move, their branches swaying as though they were alive. A voice, soft and sibilant, floated through the air. "You should not have come here." The words seemed to come from everywhere, echoing through the trees, reverberating in their bones. It was a voice older than time, filled with malice and hunger. Mark's face paled. "What the hell is that?" Suddenly, the shadows in the trees shifted. The figure from earlier, the one Sarah had seen moving between the trunks, emerged from the darkness. But this time it wasn't a shadow. It was a creature, tall and twisted, with eyes that gleamed with an unnatural light. Its skin was pale and stretched over a skeletal frame, its fingers long and sharp. It grinned at them, its teeth yellow and jagged. "We are the keepers of the forest," it said, its voice like grinding stones. "And you are ours." The realization hit them all at once. They weren't just lost in a forest. They had wandered into a place that was not bound by the laws of nature. A place where spirits, trapped for centuries, fed on the souls of the living. Mark tried to run, but the trees seemed to close in around them, blocking their path. Roots shot up from the ground, grabbing at their legs, pulling them toward the altar Sarah had seen earlier. They fought against the forest's grip, but it was useless. The whispers grew louder and the creature advanced, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "We are the forest," it hissed. "And you are lost." Suddenly, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. She spun around to find Lily standing behind her. But Lily's eyes were black, her skin gray and decayed. A twisted grin spread across her face. "You should have listened," Lily said, her voice distant and hollow. "Now you'll never leave." In that moment, Sarah realized the truth. Lily hadn't disappeared. She had never been part of the group. She had led them here to the forest's grasp. She had been the forest's agent all along, its willing servant, luring the unwitting into the trap. The last thing Sarah saw before the darkness claimed her was the creature's mouth opening wide, its jagged teeth gleaming in the gloom, and the forest closing in around them, swallowing them whole. And so, the forest grew darker, its whispers growing louder, waiting for the next travelers to fall into its eternal trap.
Like and subscribe for more horror stories.